Imagine building a fortune so vast you could buy an entire street in London's Mayfair, the tallest skyscraper in Madrid, and still have enough left over to quietly become the third richest person on Earth. That's not a scene from a movie, it's the real story of Amancio Ortega, a man born to a railway worker and a housemaid who turned sewing machines and scraps of fabric into Inditex, the empire behind Zara. Here's the twist. While Ortega's net worth once rivaled Bill Gates, you won't find him flaunting yachts on Instagram or giving flashy interviews. In fact, most Spaniards never even heard his voice until he was already a billionaire. A ghost-like tycoon pulling fashion strings that shaped how the entire world dresses. But the real question is, how did a man who grew up barefoot in rural Spain build one of the most secretive and profitable fashion dynasties in history, and what price was paid for that crown? This story doesn't just reveal wealth, it unpacks hidden strategies, controversies, and the future of the richest family in Spain. And the part that shocks most people, we haven't even touched yet. Long before Zara became a global giant, Amancio Ortega lived in a world where new clothes were a luxury. Born in 1936 in the small town of Bustongo de Arbas, León, he was the youngest of 4 children in a family that could barely make ends meet. His father worked as a railwayman, his mother cleaned houses. They had no wealth, no connections, and no pathway out of poverty except grit. At just 14 years old, Amancio dropped out of school, not because he wanted to, but because survival left no room for classrooms. He found work as a delivery boy at a shirtmaker's shop in La Coruña, carrying packages from door to door. It was there that he discovered something unusual. Customers weren't just buying fabric. They were buying speed, affordability, and style, a combination that almost no shop in Spain had mastered. Ortega learned fast. He watched how tailors cut corners without losing quality. He memorized how fabrics were sourced, how margins were hidden in plain sight. By night, he sketched his own designs and experimented with scraps. His hands moved like a machine, sewing together pieces that didn't belong, yet somehow worked. The real turning point came in 1963, when Ortega, his then-wife Rosalía Mera, and a small group of partners began making quilted bathrobes. Simple, unglamorous, but clever, they could produce them cheaply, sell them affordably, and most importantly, sell them fast. From a tiny workshop, they planted the first seed of what would later become Inditex. But here's the paradox. Ortega wasn't building a business just to survive anymore. He was building a system that would one day change the entire fashion industry. And that system would reveal itself in a small store with a simple name, Zara. But Zara was more than a store. It was a revolution waiting to ignite. It was 1975 in La Coruña when Amancio Ortega opened his first retail store. The sign above the door read one word, Zara. At first glance, it looked like any other modest clothing shop on a Spanish street. But behind those glass doors, Ortega was quietly engineering a fashion revolution. Unlike luxury houses in Paris or Milan, Zara wasn't about prestige, it was about speed. Ortega introduced what the industry would later call fast fashion. Instead of waiting months for seasonal collections, Zara could spot a trend on the runway, or even in a celebrity photo, and have a version on shelves in just 2 to 3 weeks. That speed was unheard of. Traditional fashion houses scoffed. Impossible, they said. Yet customers swarmed Zara stores. Young Spaniards who could never afford high fashion suddenly found themselves wearing clothes that looked like they belonged on a catwalk. Behind the scenes, Ortega's system was ruthless in its efficiency. He cut out middlemen, built a supply chain that ran like clockwork, and kept factories close to home in Galicia. Trucks left warehouses twice a week, delivering fresh designs to every store. Shelves never looked stale. Shopping at Zara wasn't just buying clothes, it was an experience of constant newness, and the strategy paid off. By the 1980s, Zara had expanded beyond Spain into Portugal, then France, then the United States. Ortega's empire spread like wildfire across continents, reshaping the very definition of retail. But here's the secret no one saw at first. Zara wasn't just selling fashion, it was selling control over desire itself. Ortega had discovered how to condition consumers to come back again and again, afraid to miss out on pieces that might vanish tomorrow. And while the stores were dazzling the world, something even more intriguing was happening behind the curtain because Ortega himself was vanishing from public view, turning the family into one of the most secretive dynasties in modern Europe. While Zara became a household name, Amancio Ortega did the opposite of every other billionaire. No TED Talks, no glossy magazine covers. For decades, he refused interviews. Photographs of him were so rare that Spanish newspapers described him as a phantom billionaire. It wasn't shyness, it was strategy. Ortega believed anonymity was power. By staying invisible, he protected his family, his fortune, and most importantly, his control. When rivals flaunted wealth, Ortega bought silence. When executives built personal brands, he built Inditex layer by layer like an armored fortress. And yet the wealth itself was impossible to read. Ortega's holding company quietly snapped up prime real estate, skyscrapers in Madrid, office towers in London, luxury blocks in New York and Chicago. Entire neighborhoods were reshaped by Ortega money, though few residents even knew his name. Inside the family, secrecy was equally strict. His children, Sandra, Marta, and Marcos, were raised away from the spotlight. Marta Ortega, the youngest, worked inside Zara stores as a teenager, folding clothes under a false identity so no one knew she was the heir to billions. To Ortega, this wasn't a publicity stunt, it was training. The empire had to be lived from the shop floor up. But here's the twist. While Ortega avoided cameras, his system made him impossible to ignore. By the mid-2000s, he had built Inditex into the largest fashion retailer in the world, with Zara, Pull&Bear, Bershka, and Massimo Dutti under its banner. Annual sales reached tens of billions. His fortune catapulted him into the top 5 richest people on earth. Still, the man remained almost invisible. His neighbors in Galicia would see him cycling quietly through town, stopping at the same cafe, wearing the same plain blue blazer he'd worn for years. No jewelry, no spectacle, just a man who looked like anyone else, except he was worth more than most countries. But secrecy has its price. And as Inditex grew into a global machine, cracks began to show, labor controversies, economic challenges, and whispers that the fashion empire's crown might not be as polished as it seemed. Every empire, no matter how polished, carries shadows. For Inditex, those shadows often surfaced in the form of controversies that money alone couldn't erase. The fast fashion model that made Zara unstoppable also raised uncomfortable questions. Factories in countries like Bangladesh, Morocco, and Brazil faced scrutiny for poor working conditions and wages that barely sustained life. Headlines accused Zara of benefiting from subcontractors who exploited laborers, sometimes in near-slavery conditions. Ortega himself rarely commented, maintaining his silence, but the criticisms chipped away at Zara's sleek image. Then came the environmental cost. Fast fashion meant speed. Millions of garments produced, sold, and discarded at dizzying rates. Environmentalists warned that Inditex was fueling a cycle of waste and pollution that threatened the planet. Activists labeled Zara both revolutionary and destructive, a paradox Ortega couldn't ignore forever. Economic storms added further cracks. The 2008 financial crisis tested the empire. Consumer spending collapsed across Europe. Yet Zara's quick turnover model shielded it, even allowing growth when luxury brands stumbled. Still, insiders whispered, how long could the system hold under such pressure? But perhaps the most personal challenge was succession. Who would carry the Ortega crown? His eldest daughter, Sandra Ortega, inherited billions after her mother Rosalia's passing, but she kept a low profile. His younger daughter, Marta Ortega, was groomed quietly for leadership. And in 2021, she officially took the reins as chair of Inditex, signaling a new chapter. Some analysts doubted her experience. Others believed she was the only one who truly understood her father's vision. The empire stood tall, but its image was no longer untouchable. To critics, it symbolized the excess of modern consumerism. To admirers, it remained proof of genius strategy. To Ortega, it was still just a system, one designed to survive storms. And as the next generation stepped forward, the Ortega dynasty wasn't just defending its crown, it was preparing to expand it far beyond Spain's borders. When Marta Ortega stepped into leadership in 2021, many expected a ceremonial figurehead. After all, she was young, soft-spoken, and known more for her love of horses than corporate battles. But what most outsiders missed was that Marta had been trained for this moment since childhood. She had folded clothes in Zara shops, shadowed executives, and absorbed her father's obsession with precision. Her style was different from Amancio's. Where he cloaked himself in silence, Marta embraced a new transparency, speaking at fashion summits and carefully curating her public image. Still, she carried the same ruthless pragmatism. Zara would not chase celebrity endorsements or splashy ads. It would double down on what worked: speed, scale, and control. And under Marta's watch, Inditex only grew stronger. By 2023, the company posted record profits, with revenues surpassing $35 billion. Zara had become more than a retailer, it was a cultural engine, shaping how billions dressed from Madrid to Mumbai. The Ortega family fortune soared past $80 billion, making them not just Spain's richest, but among the most powerful business dynasties on Earth. The family's reach extended beyond fashion. Through Pontegadea, their investment arm, they poured billions into real estate, skyscrapers in New York, London, and Miami, office parks in Madrid, even luxury resorts. Ortega became one of the world's largest private landlords, collecting rent from multinational corporations that had no idea their landlord was a quiet Spaniard who rarely left Galicia. Yet what made the Ortegas different from tech moguls or oil dynasties was their refusal to play the public game. No endless interviews, no political speeches, no billion-dollar yachts splashed across tabloids, just quiet dominance. But here's the hidden truth. Wealth that massive doesn't exist in isolation. Other dynasties, from Paris to Riyadh, were watching, competing, positioning, and soon the Ortega family would find itself compared not just to European tycoons, but to the great dynasties of the modern age. And that's where the story takes an even bigger turn, because the Ortegas aren't just Spain's richest family anymore. They are standing shoulder to shoulder with the most powerful billionaire clans in the world. When people think of billionaire dynasties, their minds often leap to the Waltons of America, heirs of Walmart, with fortunes stacked across supermarkets and real estate, or the Arnauds of France, rulers of LVMH, who command the luxury world with Dior, Louis Vuitton, and Moet. In the Middle East, the Al Sauds hold oil reserves so vast they shape global energy markets. And yet standing among them is a family from Galicia, Spain, the Ortegas. No oil fields, no centuries-old aristocracy, just fabric, thread, and a system that rewrote how fashion works. By the numbers, their empire is staggering. Over 7,000 stores across more than 90 countries. Billions in real estate assets, from London's Oxford Street to Manhattan's Fifth Avenue. A family fortune surpassing $80 billion, placing them in the top tier of global wealth. But here's what makes them different. While other dynasties thrive on visibility, the Ortegas thrive on absence. There's no luxury perfume campaign featuring Amancio's face. No splashy political campaigns bankrolled with Ortega money. Instead, their power is felt through quiet ownership, owning the buildings where others work, the stores where others shop, and the systems that shape global demand. Critics call them invisible landlords of modern life. Admirers see them as proof that discipline and silence can outmaneuver spectacle. Either way, their influence is undeniable. And unlike old dynasties weighed down by tradition, the Ortegas are still in motion. Marta Ortega represents not just succession, but evolution. Under her, Inditex is investing in sustainability, digital commerce, and a global reach that stretches far beyond the catwalk. But here's the lingering question: can the Ortegas maintain their silent empire in a world where transparency is demanded, and where younger consumers want not just fashion but values behind the brand? Because the Ortega story doesn't just belong to Spain anymore, it belongs to the world, and its next chapter may redefine what it means to be a dynasty in the 21st century. From a barefoot boy in Leon carrying packages through the streets to a dynasty that reshaped closets across every continent, the story of the Ortegas is not just about wealth, it is about vision, discipline, and the audacity to build a system so precise that even empires of oil and luxury had to take notice. Amancio Ortega never chased the spotlight, yet the world could not ignore him. He built Zara not as a brand of glamour, but as a machine of desire, feeding billions with style they didn't know they needed faster than anyone thought possible. In his silence, he proved that you don't need noise to command attention. Power can whisper and still be heard across the globe. Now, under Marta Ortega, the empire faces new demands: sustainability, transparency, and a generation that wants more than just fashion. Whether they rise to that challenge or not will define the next chapter. But one thing is already certain: the Ortegas have carved their place among the great dynasties of modern history. In the end, their story echoes a truth as old as empire itself. Great fortunes are not built overnight. They are stitched, thread by thread, into the fabric of nations. And some, like the Ortega dynasty, become the very cloth that drapes the world.